By day, I was the perfect brother. By night, I was someone else entirely. This is the story of how Jehovah saved me from myself. I never thought I'd see the day when my own double life would come crashing down. For months I pretended to be the perfect brother at meetings, smiling, giving comments and even helping with congregation tasks. But once I left the Kingdom Hall, I went back to a lifestyle I knew was wrong. I thought I was hiding it well, but Jehovah sees everything. The night the elders knocked on my door, my heart nearly stopped. It was the beginning of the hardest and most beautiful journey of my life. Before I go on, I want to thank every one of you watching and supporting this channel. Your encouragement, your comments and your kind words inspire me to keep sharing these stories of faith and hope. If you haven't subscribed yet, please take a moment to hit that button so you don't miss the next powerful story that could touch your heart or someone you love. To the congregation, I was Brother Caleb, the young man who never missed a meeting, who commented on almost every paragraph during the Watchtower study, and who often volunteered to help with sound equipment or cleaning. My reputation was spotless. People often said, "Caleb is such a fine young brother, he will surely make an excellent ministerial servant soon." But what no one knew was that I was living a lie. It all started with small compromises. I worked a demanding job in a busy office where my colleagues lived for parties, after-work drinks and weekend adventures. At first I told myself I was just being friendly when I joined them. I wouldn't drink much, and I wouldn't stay out late. But little by little I started blending in more than I should have. The music, the laughter, the way they talked, it all pulled me in. Before long I was living two separate lives. On Sunday mornings I'd be at the Kingdom Hall, wearing my tie and smiling like nothing was wrong. But Friday nights, I'd be at a club with my coworkers, dancing to music I knew didn't honor Jehovah. I convinced myself that I was still faithful, because I never missed a meeting. But deep down I knew Jehovah saw my hypocrisy. The breaking point came one Saturday night. I had gone to another harmless party. I told myself I'd just show up for an hour and then leave. But one drink turned into three, and three turned into more. I lost track of time. By the time I stumbled home, it was 3 a.m. The next morning I had to give a talk, during the Theocratic Ministry School. Standing there, holding the Bible, my hands trembled. I could barely look at anyone in the eye, because I knew my heart was not clean. I told myself I'd stop. I promised Jehovah in prayer that I'd change, but temptation had its claws deep in me. For weeks I went back and forth, attending meetings but still giving in to my secret lifestyle. One evening, after another tiring day of pretending, I came home to a knock on my door. When I opened it, I saw two elders from my congregation standing there. My heart dropped. "Caleb, can we come in?" Brother James asked kindly, but his eyes were serious. That moment felt like every wall I had built around my double life was crashing down. My first instinct was to lie, to tell them I was fine. But the truth, I was anything but fine. I let them in, but my hands were still shaking. Brother James and Brother Emmanuel sat quietly for a moment as I tried to gather myself. My apartment still smelled faintly of alcohol from the weekend before. I'd hidden the worst of my habits, but I could tell from their expressions, they already knew. Not everything maybe, but enough. Brother Emmanuel was the first to speak. "Caleb," he said gently, "we're not here to shame you or to hurt you. We're here because we love you, Jehovah loves you, and there's concern." I lowered my eyes. "We've heard some things, and we wanted to talk to you directly," he continued. "We know you've been struggling, and we want to help." In that moment I wanted the floor to open and swallow me whole. I had worked so hard to be the good brother, my image had become my mask, but now, face to face with men who genuinely cared about my spiritual health, I couldn't lie anymore. Tears welled up in my eyes. "Brothers," I choked, "I've messed up, I've really messed up." And with that, it all came pouring out. The drinking, the parties, the people I'd been spending time with, the dishonesty, the guilt. How I'd prayed some nights, begging Jehovah to forgive me, only to fall back into the same habits the next weekend. I half expected them to stand up and walk out. Or worse, to react with shock or anger, but instead they just listened. When I finally finished, there was a long pause. Then Brother James said something that hit me deep. "Caleb, you are not the first person to fall. But what you do next, that's what matters." Jehovah disciplines those he loves. Not to destroy them, but to help them stand again, this time stronger. That night, they prayed with me. I don't remember all the words, but I remember the feeling. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't hiding anymore. I felt seen, and not in a condemning way, but in a freeing, healing way. They scheduled a shepherding call later that week. They encouraged me to be honest in everything moving forward. No more secrets, no more pretending. It was time to confront the consequences, but also embrace Jehovah's mercy. The days that followed weren't easy. The body of elders met. I was invited to meet with a judicial committee. Just hearing those words made my stomach twist in knots, but I knew I had to go. I had to be accountable. I had to be honest, not just with the elders, but with Jehovah and with myself. When I sat in front of the committee, I laid it all bare. There was no point in hiding anymore. I told them everything, every compromise, every time I justified sin, every prayer I whispered in guilt. There were moments I cried. There were moments I couldn't even speak. But the brothers were patient. They reminded me of King David, not because I was anything like him, but because even a faithful man can fall. And even then, Jehovah offers mercy when the heart is humble. In the end, I was reproved and removed from privileges. Publicly. The next meeting, the announcement was made. Caleb will no longer be serving in congregation responsibilities. Just like that, the image I had worked so hard to maintain came crumbling down in front of everyone. I went home that night, and cried harder than I had in years. Not because I was angry, but because the weight of everything finally settled on my chest. My fall was public. But deep down, I knew, so would my return. The real struggle began after the announcement. No more standing at the literature counter. No more microphones, no more title. Some people looked at me differently, though most were kind. A few avoided eye contact. One or two even asked, "What happened?" But I just smiled and said, "Jehovah is helping me grow." It was humbling. And that humility began to change me. I started praying more earnestly. I wasn't just praying out of guilt anymore. I was praying for strength, for wisdom, for Jehovah's Spirit to fill in the cracks that years of double living had created in my heart. And Jehovah, so patiently, began to answer. Little things started to matter again. Sitting quietly at meetings. Listening more deeply. Preparing for the watchtower. Not because I had to comment, but because I wanted to understand. I began reading Psalms again, and certain verses jumped off the page as if they were written just for me. One morning, during personal study, I came across a thought that said, "Jehovah sees who you are when no one else is watching, and he still calls you his child." I wept. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel like a sinner trying to hide. I felt like a son trying to come home. One night, about 3 months into my reproof, I was walking out of the Kingdom Hall when a Sister Ada, approached me. She smiled warmly and said, "You know, Caleb, I just want to say, your humility has touched many of us. We see you, and we see Jehovah helping you." That small encouragement gave me more fuel than she'll ever know. Because the road back is long, but it's also full of mercy. There's something deeply humbling about starting over, not because you were forced to, but because your conscience wouldn't let you continue the way you were. I'd spent so much time trying to be seen as the ideal brother, that I forgot the most important thing. Jehovah doesn't care about the performance, he cares about the heart. And now that I had nothing left to hide behind, no privileges, no title, no image to maintain, I could finally face Jehovah honestly. In those early months after my reproof, I treated every meeting like a lifeline. I sat quietly, usually somewhere in the back, not because I felt unworthy to be near the front, but because I wanted to listen more than I spoke. The words from the platform weren't just information anymore, they were medicine. Every scripture, every experience shared, every warm smile from a fellow publisher reminded me that Jehovah had not left me. I had walked away, but he had been waiting patiently for me to turn around. One Thursday evening, we studied a Watchtower article about drawing close to Jehovah despite our past mistakes. I remember the exact sentence that gripped me. Even when we fall, Jehovah is ready to lift us up if we humbly reach for his hand. I sat in that meeting fighting tears, because I was reaching, every single day. And Jehovah, he was lifting. I started setting goals for myself, not to regain privileges quickly, but to rebuild my spiritual habits from the inside out. My first goal: wake up 30 minutes earlier every morning for personal study. At first I struggled. Some mornings, I fell asleep with my Bible open on my lap. But little by little, those quiet moments with Jehovah became the highlight of my day. I also committed to regular field service again, even though I felt nervous joining the group. The first time I raised my hand for territory, I could feel eyes on me, not judging, just surprised. But the brother assigning the group simply smiled and said, "It's good to have you back, Caleb." Those small reassurances helped more than people knew. At first I went out in service with older brothers, who didn't ask many questions, but always had a warm spirit. I liked that. It gave me room to think, to listen, and to slowly learn how to be joyful again in my worship, not just dutiful. One Saturday morning, I was paired with Brother Kenneth, an elderly brother who had been serving faithfully for decades. We didn't place any literature that day. In fact, most people didn't answer the doors. But what I remember most was what he said as we walked back to the car. "You know, Caleb," he said, adjusting his Bible in his arm, "Jehovah doesn't measure us by how fast we recover, but by how fully we rely on him in the process." That statement sat in my chest like a stone, a comforting one. Up until that moment, part of me still felt like I had to prove I was good enough again. I thought if I just worked hard enough, studied long enough, prayed passionately enough, then maybe Jehovah would look at me the way he used to. But what Brother Kenneth said helped me realize I was already seen. Jehovah had never stopped looking, and more importantly, he had never stopped loving. My relationship with my family also started to shift during this time. My younger sister Naomi had always looked up to me. She was the one who took it hardest when everything came out. I remember the day she told me through tears, "I didn't know who you were anymore." That crushed me more than any announcement from the platform ever could. So, part of my healing meant repairing that bond. I began writing her little notes, just one sentence each, with a scripture. I'd leave them on her desk, sometimes tucked into her Bible. I never asked if she read them. But one night, I found one of my notes taped inside the cover of her notebook. That's when I knew healing was happening, not just in me, but around me too. About 5 months after my reproof, something unexpected happened. After a particularly moving public talk, one of the elders, Brother Emmanuel, one of the two who'd visited me that night, came over after the meeting and asked if we could talk. I was nervous, but I nodded. We sat outside on the Kingdom Hall steps, and he said, "I want you to know, the body has been praying for you, and we've seen the change, not just on the outside, but in your spirit. It's clear Jehovah's hand is with you." I was speechless. He went on, "We're not rushing anything, but when the time comes, we want you to know, we'd be glad to recommend you again, when you're ready." My eyes filled with tears, not because I was eager for privileges, but because that affirmation reminded me that Jehovah really does restore what we think we've ruined. Of course, the journey wasn't without setbacks. There were days I felt unworthy all over again, days when memories of my mistakes would sneak up on me like shadows. But I held on to something that had become my daily prayer. "Jehovah, let me not be who I was. Let me be who you always knew I could become." One Sunday morning, I arrived at the Kingdom Hall early. The sun was still rising, and the hall was quiet. I walked up to the stage, sat down in the second row, and just looked around. I remembered all the times I had stood up there, teaching, serving, pretending. But now, sitting quietly, I felt more useful than I ever had before, because for the first time in a long time, I was worshiping in spirit and truth, not performance. And that, I realized, was enough. I used to believe that falling was the end, that once your reputation was damaged, once people saw you stumble, it was over. But Jehovah has taught me something far greater. Redemption is more powerful than reputation. It wasn't just about being forgiven, it was about being transformed. One evening, nearly 8 months after I had been reproved, I was sitting quietly at home, finishing a study session on Jehovah's mercy. I came across a familiar verse that said Jehovah is ready to forgive. I'd read that so many times before, but this time, I stopped at the word ready. He wasn't reluctant, he wasn't hesitant, he was ready. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." The very next day, I received a message from one of the elders. "Caleb, would you be available for a meeting with us this week?" I didn't know what to expect, but I said yes. When I arrived at the Kingdom Hall and sat with the elders, I noticed something different in their faces. Not suspicion, not hesitation, but genuine warmth. "Caleb," Brother James said, "your efforts have not gone unnoticed. The body of elders has prayerfully discussed your situation. Your repentance, humility and spiritual progress have been evident. With Jehovah's direction and love, we are happy to restore your privileges." I didn't speak for a long time, I couldn't. Tears rolled silently down my face. This wasn't just a formality, it was a fulfillment. A fulfillment of every prayer I had cried on my bedroom floor, every early morning I had dragged myself out of bed to study Jehovah's word, every act of service I had quietly offered, not to impress, but to grow. I wasn't returning to who I used to be, I was returning to Jehovah, as someone new. That Sunday the announcement was made. I sat quietly again, this time with my heart full, not of fear, but of peace. After the meeting, many brothers and sisters came up to shake my hand or embrace me. Some didn't say much, just a smile, or a nod. Others had tears in their eyes. But the most powerful moment came when a young brother named Daniel pulled me aside. He was about 19, relatively quiet in the congregation, and he spoke in a near whisper. "Brother Caleb," he said, "I want you to know, I was going down the same path. Watching you come back, it gave me hope." That's when I realized, my fall wasn't just about me, neither was my return. Jehovah was using my brokenness to encourage someone else. My mistake was no longer just a wound, it had become a witness. From that point on, I started taking time to connect with others who seemed distant or withdrawn. I didn't try to lecture or preach, I simply shared my journey. I told them how Jehovah never gave up on me, even when I had given up on myself. I spoke honestly about guilt, about discipline, about loneliness, but also about mercy, healing, and restoration. And over time, I began to notice something. People didn't remember me for my fall anymore. They remembered me for my return. One particular experience stands out. A sister named Lydia, a single mom, had been irregular at meetings. People whispered, wondering why she didn't get her act together. One day, I noticed she stayed behind after the meeting, looking unsure of herself. I walked over and simply said, "You doing okay?" She looked startled, then she quietly said, "It's hard, feeling like I don't belong here anymore." I didn't offer a sermon, I just sat with her and said, "I know that feeling. But Jehovah hasn't moved, he's still right where you left him, and he'll walk with you back." She cried, and from that day forward, she never missed another meeting. My appreciation for the congregation also changed. I had always seen it as an audience, but now I saw it as a family, a real messy beautiful family. Not one of us is perfect, but when we fall we help each other up, and when one is restored, we all rejoice. The verse that became my anthem was this: "When I was silent, my bones wore out through my groaning all day long, but then I confessed my sin, and you forgave me." Those words became the story of my life. A year after my fall, I was asked to give my first student talk again. My hands shook as I stood behind the podium, but this time, not because I was pretending to be confident, but because I was deeply aware of the privilege to speak again. I gave my talk on Jehovah's mercy, and when I finished, I looked out at the congregation, people who had prayed for me, walked with me, forgiven me. It was no longer about how I appeared, it was about how Jehovah had transformed me. Today I still remember that night. The elders came to my door. It felt like the beginning of the end. But now I see it differently. It was the beginning of my return. Maybe you're watching this, and you feel far from Jehovah. Maybe you're hiding something, ashamed, broken, or unsure how to fix what's been damaged. Let me tell you something from my heart. Jehovah doesn't want to expose you to destroy you. He wants to restore you. His discipline isn't punishment, it's love. His correction isn't rejection, it's invitation, and your return can be greater than your fall. Please don't stay in the shadows. Pray, confess, Let Jehovah walk you home, and when he does, your story won't be about your sin, it will be about his mercy. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart, please like, share and subscribe. There's someone else out there who might need this message too. Never forget, no matter how far you've gone, Jehovah's arms are always open.